It was just another ordinary day for Special Agent Maya Carter. At least, that's how it seemed at first. The sun was up, the sky was clear, and the morning air felt fresh. People went about their usual business, unaware of the quiet woman moving through the bustling FBI office. Her colleagues walked past her without much thought, their eyes already on their next tasks, their minds already busy with their own problems. But Maya wasn't like the rest of them. She didn't need to speak loudly to be noticed. She didn't need to be the center of attention. She didn't want that, anyway. Maya knew what it was like to be invisible. She had learned how to stay in the background, how to observe the world around her without drawing too much attention. But today was different. Maya had a secret, something that could change everything. She wasn't just any FBI agent, no matter what others might have thought of her. She had spent years hiding her true strength, her true skills. In the world of high-stakes crime and dangerous investigations, Maya's story was one that no one knew. And it was one that could shake the very foundations of the people who underestimated her. No one in that office had any idea who she really was, not the quiet woman sitting at her desk. They thought she was just another agent, another person doing her job. But Maya had a past, a history that few knew about. She wasn't just a woman in a suit. She wasn't just a name on a list of agents. Maya Carter had a story that would make everyone take a second look. As she sat in her small, tidy office, surrounded by files and papers, Maya didn't look like someone who could change the world. To most people, she was just another agent doing her job. But to those who had known her before, it was clear that there was more to Maya than met the eye. Her office was neat and quiet, a place where she could think clearly. The walls were bare except for a few framed certificates, reminders of her years of training and success. On the desk in front of her were files that needed to be read, cases that needed to be solved. But today, Maya's mind wasn't on the cases. Today, her thoughts were on something far more important. Maya had always kept her emotions hidden. She didn't like to let anyone see how much the work affected her. But deep down, she felt a quiet, burning determination. No one understood how much she wanted to prove herself. Everyone thought she was just another agent, someone who could be easily ignored. They didn't know the truth. They didn't know what Maya was capable of. It wasn't that she hated the work. She loved it, in fact. Being an FBI agent was more than a job to Maya, it was a mission. It was a chance to make a difference, to fight for what was right. But no one knew that Maya had come from a place of struggle, of hardship. They didn't know that her journey to this point hadn't been easy. They didn't know the pain she had carried with her for years. Her colleagues might have seen her as quiet, maybe even shy. She didn't raise her voice or call attention to herself. But Maya knew that in the shadows, where no one was looking, that was where she would strike. They didn't see the fire in her eyes, the quiet strength that burned inside her. And they certainly didn't know what she had overcome to get here. Her past was filled with obstacles. Growing up, Maya had faced challenges that many people couldn't imagine. She had fought to get to this point, to prove that she could do something more than just survive. And now, as an FBI agent, she was about to show the world what she was made of. But no one knew the side of her, not yet. To everyone else, Maya was just another agent in a busy office, another person going through the motions. She wasn't loud. She wasn't demanding. She wasn't trying to prove anything to anyone. Or so they thought. In truth, Maya was a woman on a mission. Her quiet demeanor was not a sign of weakness. It was the calm before the storm. And one day, everyone would learn that under her calm exterior was a powerful force, a force they could never have imagined. Maya had learned the hard way that people often underestimated those who stayed silent. But silence didn't mean weakness. It meant patience. It meant power waiting to be used at the right moment. Maya knew when to hold back, when to let others think they had the upper hand. But there was a part of her that was ready. Ready for the moment when she would prove everyone wrong. She had worked hard to get where she was. She had sacrificed so much, put in countless hours of training and study, faced prejudice and doubt, all to get to this point. But now, she was ready for the next step. She wasn't just going to be another face in the crowd. She was going to be someone people would remember. Maya was no stranger to being underestimated. She had learned to take it in stride, to use it to her advantage. When people thought she wasn't paying attention, that was when she was watching them most closely. She had learned to be patient. To wait. To bide her time. And now, her time was coming. There was one person in particular who had been a thorn in her side for as long as she could remember, Officer Greg Donovan. Donovan was everything that Maya had worked to rise above. He was rude, arrogant, and dismissive. He believed that because of his position, his power, he could treat others however he wanted. Maya had seen how Donovan treated people, how he used his position to belittle others, especially women and minorities. She had watched him mock the other agents, make racist jokes, and take credit for things that weren't his work. He thought he was untouchable. He thought he was above the rules. But what Donovan didn't know was that Maya was watching. She saw everything. She took note of every small thing he did, every comment he made, every act of disrespect he showed. And she was ready. Ready to use it all against him when the time was right. Maya didn't need to prove herself to anyone. She didn't need to shout or demand respect. She was quietly, slowly, and carefully preparing for the day when she would make her move. And when that day came, Donovan would learn just how wrong he was about her. She wasn't just any agent. She wasn't just a quiet woman who worked in the shadows. Maya Carter was a force to be reckoned with. And soon, everyone would know it. It wasn't long before Maya started to feel the weight of the world on her shoulders. Every day at the FBI department, she could sense the quiet but sharp eyes on her. Whispers followed her everywhere. People didn't speak directly to her, but the way they looked at her made her skin crawl. The way they looked, the way they talked behind her back, it was all there. The judgment. The prejudice. As a black woman in a field dominated by powerful, often prejudiced men, Maya was used to being overlooked. She had grown up with this, always having to prove herself. Always being treated as if she was less than, as if her worth didn't match up to the people around her. Every time someone looked at her, she saw the same thing, doubt. The doubt that she belonged. But no one made her feel that doubt more than Officer Greg Donovan. He wasn't just any officer. He was everything Maya hated about the system. He was arrogant, dismissive, and racist. Donovan never bothered to hide his disdain for Maya. He was always open with his prejudice, always making sure she knew that, in his eyes, she didn't belong in a place like this. She wasn't like the other agents. She didn't fit the mold. From the very first moment she walked into the precinct, Donovan made it clear. She didn't belong. She was different. And that was something he would never let her forget. Maya tried to ignore him at first, tried to focus on the work, tried to keep her head down. But it didn't take long for his snide remarks and sarcastic tone to start getting under her skin. Every time they crossed paths, Donovan would roll his eyes whenever she spoke, acting as if she wasn't worth his time. "Got a lot of nerve, don't you, Carter?" he'd sneer. His voice was cold, and his words cut like a knife. "Hope you can handle it." It was always the same. His mocking tone. His belief that she wasn't strong enough for this job. His silent challenge that screamed, "Prove me wrong." Maya hated the way he looked at her, like she was less than him. Like her presence was some kind of joke. His eyes were always filled with disgust. But what made it worse was that others seemed to agree with him. Maya wasn't just fighting Donovan's prejudice, she was fighting the silence of everyone else who allowed him to act that way. She had seen how they all looked the other way, how they stayed silent when Donovan made his crude comments. How they laughed along with his jokes. How no one said anything when he mocked her in front of everyone. It was like she was invisible. Not just to Donovan, but to everyone around her. No one stood up for her. No one cared. They were all too comfortable in their silence, too comfortable letting Donovan's toxic behavior slide. But Maya wasn't about to let it continue. She had learned to stay quiet, to ignore the hurtful words, but deep inside, she was burning. Burning with anger. Burning with the desire to make them see her not just as a black woman, but as an equal. Donovan's cruelty, his constant disrespect, was like gasoline on a fire. Every time he made a jab at her, every time he belittled her, Maya's resolve grew stronger. It made her want to prove him wrong more than anything. But she wasn't just going to prove him wrong by matching his arrogance with her own. No, Maya had learned better than that. She wasn't going to stoop to his level. Instead, she would let her work speak for itself. She had been trained for this. She had prepared herself for the moment when she would have to stand tall in the face of injustice. And the more Donovan pushed, the more Maya was ready. The more he tried to knock her down, the more determined she became to stand firm. The department was full of people who thought they knew her. They thought they could judge her based on her appearance, based on the way she spoke, based on the way she carried herself. But none of them knew the real Maya Carter. They didn't know the strength that ran deep inside her. They didn't know the fire she had kept hidden for so long. Every time Donovan made his cruel comments, every time he mocked her, Maya added it to the list of reasons she had to prove herself. She kept track of every moment, every remark. She didn't forget. But Donovan wasn't the only one who saw Maya as an outsider. She had noticed how the others treated her, too. Some of her colleagues didn't say much, but she could feel the distance. They didn't believe she belonged there either. Some of them tried to be polite, but Maya could tell they didn't trust her. They didn't think she had what it took. And that, more than anything, hurt. She had worked hard to get where she was. She had put in years of training, sacrificed time, energy, and even relationships, just to prove she was good enough for this job. And yet, every day, it felt like no one saw that. They didn't see the late nights she had spent studying, the sacrifices she had made to get here. They just saw a black woman in a sea of white faces. They saw someone they thought they could ignore, someone who wouldn't challenge them. But that wasn't who Maya was. She wasn't here to be invisible. She wasn't here to let them walk all over her. She wasn't going to be overlooked or pushed aside. She had worked too hard for that. So, every day, she endured Donovan's taunts. Every day, she kept her head high and moved forward. It was hard. It was tiring. But Maya didn't let it break her. Instead, she used it. She used the disrespect, the prejudice, the hate, and turned it into fuel. Because deep down, Maya knew something Donovan didn't. Every time he insulted her, every time he belittled her, he was only pushing her closer to the moment when she would prove him wrong. Days passed, and Donovan's behavior only escalated. He was no longer subtle about his hatred for Maya. He would openly mock her, making sure to do it in front of their colleagues, as if he was proud of his actions. He would question her qualifications in front of others, as if to remind everyone that she didn't deserve to be there. He would ask her condescending questions, trying to make her look foolish, as if she had no business being in the FBI. "Are you sure you're cut out for this, Carter?" Donovan would say, his voice dripping with sarcasm. "I mean, I don't think we need anyone who's just here for the paycheck." He'd laugh at his own joke, as if it was the funniest thing in the world. But Maya never responded with anything other than quiet professionalism. She didn't let him see how much his words hurt her. She didn't let anyone see how much it bothered her that she had to endure this every day. Instead, she kept her focus on the job. She kept her eyes on the bigger picture. The more Donovan taunted her, the more Maya observed. She became more aware of his every move. She noticed how he walked into the room, how his shoulders puffed up as if he was the most important person there. She noticed how his colleagues treated him with the kind of respect that he hadn't earned. They laughed along with his jokes as if they were harmless. They didn't see him for what he really was. They didn't see how he used his position to belittle others, to make them feel small. Maya didn't let their laughter fool her. She could see through it. She could see how the system had allowed Donovan to get away with it for so long. He wasn't just disrespecting her. He was disrespecting everyone who wasn't like him. He was using his power to make people feel inferior, and he thought no one would do anything about it. But what Donovan didn't realize was that Maya wasn't just observing him. She was gathering information. Every word he said, every gesture he made, every small interaction, she was taking note of it all. She kept a mental list of everything he did, every person he tried to manipulate, every moment when he tried to prove he was better than everyone else. It wasn't that Maya was just waiting for the right moment to snap back. She wasn't going to stoop to his level. No, Maya was smarter than that. She was quietly analyzing everything. She was paying attention to the little details, to the things Donovan didn't think anyone noticed. For weeks, she watched him closely. She saw how he tried to control conversations, how he subtly bullied other agents into doing his work for him. She saw how he was always ready to take credit for things that weren't even his idea. Donovan had a way of making others feel like they owed him, like they were lucky to be in his presence. And while Maya noticed all of this, she kept her silence. She wasn't going to let Donovan know what she was really thinking. She wasn't going to let him see that she was already one step ahead of him. Donovan was beginning to think that his behavior had no consequences. He thought that Maya's silence meant she was weak, that she would never do anything about it. And maybe that was true. Maybe Maya wouldn't confront him directly. But what Donovan didn't know was that Maya wasn't waiting for the perfect moment to take him down with a big confrontation. She wasn't looking for a fight. No, Maya was playing the long game. She knew that the system was built in Donovan's favor. He was the kind of person who believed he was untouchable, and for so long, it had been true. But what Donovan didn't realize was that the system was about to change. It wasn't going to be torn down in one day or with one loud outburst. It was going to be dismantled piece by piece. And Maya, with all her quiet strength, was the one who was going to do it. In the meantime, she kept gathering information. Donovan thought his jokes were harmless, that his taunts were just part of the game. But Maya knew better. She knew that every remark he made, every bit of power he tried to wield, was a small crack in the foundation. And all it took was one crack to bring the whole thing down. There were moments when Maya almost felt like Donovan was trying to break her. He would push her buttons, say things just to see how she would react. But Maya had long since learned to control her emotions. She had learned that people like Donovan thrived on anger, on making others lose control. He wanted to see her react, to see her get upset, so he could use it against her. But Maya wouldn't give him that satisfaction. Instead, she stayed calm. She stayed focused. Every time he mocked her, every time he made her feel small, Maya used it as fuel. She wasn't going to fight fire with fire. She was going to fight fire with patience. She would let Donovan keep pushing, keep mocking her, and every time he did, she would learn something new about him. And Maya wasn't just learning about Donovan. She was learning about the department, about the people who allowed this kind of behavior to happen. She saw how they were all complicit in their silence. How they let things slide because they were comfortable. How they turned a blind eye to the abuse because it didn't affect them. But Maya was different. She wasn't going to stay silent. She wasn't going to pretend that everything was okay just because it was easier that way. She would be the one to stand up, to speak out, even if it meant going against everyone else. Maya began to realize something else, something even more important: she wasn't alone. There were others who felt the same way she did, who saw what was happening but were too afraid to speak up. Some of her colleagues began to look at her differently, as if they could see her strength, her quiet determination. They didn't say anything, not yet, but Maya could feel their eyes on her, could sense the shift in the air when she walked into a room. It wasn't much, but it was enough. Enough for Maya to know that things were changing. Enough for her to know that the people who had been silent for so long were starting to wake up. They were starting to see that the way things had always been done wasn't right. They were starting to see that Donovan wasn't the only one with power in the room. And as she continued to gather information, to observe the world around her, Maya realized that she had something that Donovan didn't: patience. He thought he could break her, but all he was doing was making her stronger. The day everything changed started like any other day. The sun had barely risen, casting soft light across the precinct as officers filtered in to begin their work. For most, it was just another day on the job, nothing special, nothing out of the ordinary. But for Maya Carter, it wasn't just another day. This day was different. Today was the day she had been preparing for, the day when everything would come to a head. She walked into the precinct, her steps purposeful, her face calm. She passed the familiar desks, the hum of phones ringing, the clattering of keyboards filling the air. But she didn't pay attention to any of it. Not today. Today, Maya had a single focus. She wasn't just walking in as an agent today, she was walking in as someone who was about to change everything. As usual, Officer Greg Donovan was standing by the coffee machine, laughing loudly with a group of officers. He didn't even notice Maya at first. But when he did, his smile grew, and he couldn't resist making another one of his cruel jokes at her expense. "Nice of you to finally show up, Carter. Don't want to keep the men waiting, huh?" he sneered, his voice thick with mockery. He glanced around at his colleagues, expecting them to join in with their laughter. But this time, something was different. The room grew silent as Maya didn't respond the way she usually did. She didn't ignore him. She didn't lower her head, pretending it didn't affect her. No, today she stood still. She locked eyes with Donovan, and for the first time, the smug look on his face faltered. Donovan's confidence began to waver as Maya's gaze held steady, unwavering. There was no trace of fear in her eyes. No trace of hesitation. She stood tall, calm, but there was something powerful in her presence. For a moment, Donovan didn't know what to do. He shifted on his feet, suddenly unsure of himself. His usual sarcasm seemed empty, like it didn't belong in this moment. But he quickly recovered, throwing another smug glance her way, ready to laugh off his remark. But Maya wasn't finished. "I think it's time you learned who I really am," she said, her voice cutting through the silence. It wasn't loud or forceful, but there was a firmness to it that made everyone in the room pause. It wasn't the response they were used to. And Donovan, for the first time, didn't know how to react. The other officers watched closely, sensing that something was about to happen. The usual atmosphere of teasing and mockery shifted, replaced with a tension that seemed to hang in the air. Maya's eyes never left Donovan's. Without breaking her gaze, she slowly unbuttoned her jacket. The movement was deliberate, almost symbolic, like she was shedding the calm, unassuming persona that Donovan had come to expect. As her jacket came off, Donovan's eyes narrowed. He was still standing there, expecting this to be just another joke, just another moment he could laugh off. But as the jacket fell to the floor, it revealed the badge that Maya had been hiding all along. The room went completely still. Maya wasn't just Agent Carter, the quiet, often overlooked agent. She wasn't the person Donovan thought he could humiliate and walk over. No. She was Special Agent Maya Carter. And this time, she wasn't staying silent. "I'm Special Agent Maya Carter," she said, her voice stronger now, carrying the weight of authority. "And I'm here to make sure people like you don't get away with it anymore." The words hit like a shockwave. Donovan froze. His mouth went dry. His smug smile faltered for the first time. In the space of a few seconds, the room seemed to close in on him. For all his arrogance, for all his bullying, Donovan had no idea what was happening. He had no idea that Maya had been gathering evidence on him for months, patiently working behind the scenes while he continued to make his cruel jokes and take advantage of his position. Maya had been quietly building a case against him, collecting evidence of his illegal activities. She had been observing him, listening to the way he treated others, the way he used his power to manipulate and control. She had watched as he made his victims feel small, as he hid behind his badge and his privileges, thinking that he could do whatever he wanted without consequences. But now, everything was different. Donovan's eyes darted around the room, looking for some kind of escape, some way to save face, but the silence around him was suffocating. His colleagues were staring at him now, their eyes wide, some in disbelief, others in growing realization that Maya wasn't just a victim of his behavior, she was someone who had been quietly gathering the pieces of his downfall. "You can't," Donovan started, but his voice faltered. He had no words. He had no defense. Everything he had thought about Maya, everything he had believed about his own superiority, was crumbling right in front of him. Maya didn't say another word. Instead, she reached into her pocket and pulled out a folder Donovan hadn't seen before. With a single, controlled motion, she placed it on the desk in front of him. The papers inside weren't just a collection of notes or observations. They were the pieces of a case. A case that would bring him down. The other officers were still watching, unsure of what to do, unsure of what they were witnessing. Some looked at Maya with respect, others with shock, and a few with guilt. They had all seen what Donovan had been doing for months, maybe even years, but none of them had ever had the courage to speak out. Maya had been the quiet one, the one who always took it, the one who never fought back. But now, they saw something entirely different. They saw her strength. They saw the power of someone who had been underestimated, someone who had quietly prepared for this moment. And Donovan? Donovan saw his world crumble. He took a step back, his hand shaking as he reached for the papers in the folder. As his eyes scanned the documents, his face went pale. The evidence was irrefutable. He knew it. He could see it in black and white. There was no way out now. The walls were closing in on him. Maya stood tall, watching him. She didn't need to say anything else. The truth was there, laid bare before everyone. For the first time in a long while, Donovan's arrogance slipped away. He was no longer the man in control. The officers in the room started to murmur among themselves. Some looked at Maya with admiration, some with disbelief. They had seen the signs. They had seen Donovan's behavior. But none of them had ever expected Maya to be the one to stand up and expose it. Maya didn't need to say anything more. She had already done what she came to do. She had exposed Donovan for what he truly was, someone who thought his power and position could protect him. But in the end, it was his own arrogance, his own disregard for others, that had brought him down. The room was still, the weight of the moment sinking in. Donovan was no longer the one in control. He was the one being exposed. The tension in the room was thick. Donovan stood frozen in front of Maya, his hands trembling slightly as he read over the evidence she had so carefully gathered. His mind raced, trying to think of a way to salvage the situation, but it was clear that the truth had already been laid bare. His smug smile, the one that had always been so confident and dismissive, had long since faded. In its place was a mask of disbelief, denial, even. I. I don't know what you're talking about, Donovan stammered, his voice shaky, as he tried to gather the strength to defend himself. He turned to the officers in the room, desperate to find someone who would believe his lies, but no one met his gaze. They all stood in stunned silence, unwilling to side with him any longer. Maya stood with calm authority, her face steady, her posture strong. She didn't need to say another word. Donovan's defenses were crumbling, and there was nothing left for him to do but try to save whatever dignity he had left. You can try to deny it all you want, Donovan, Maya said, her voice low but firm. But the truth is right in front of you. Your actions, your choices, they've all been recorded. You can't hide from it anymore. The officers around them stood in stunned silence, unsure of what to say or do. Some were still processing what had just happened, but others, those who had been quietly watching Donovan's behavior over the years, felt a sense of justice starting to take hold. It wasn't just about what Maya had done in that moment. It was about everything she had endured, everything she had kept quiet about, while Donovan used his power to manipulate, belittle, and intimidate. Donovan's face twisted in frustration, his hands balled into fists as he looked at the papers in front of him. He knew it was over. The evidence against him was undeniable. He had no way out. The confidence he had once worn like a shield was now nothing more than a brittle mask, ready to shatter at the slightest pressure. He opened his mouth to speak, but the words caught in his throat. Instead, he just glared at Maya, his eyes filled with anger and humiliation. "This isn't over," he muttered under his breath, though his words held no real power anymore. There was no fight left in him. Before he could say anything else, two security officers stepped forward, signaling that it was time for him to leave. His head hung low as they guided him toward the door, his once proud stance now diminished to that of a man who had lost everything. As he passed by Maya, their eyes met one final time. There was no smugness in his gaze now, only a deep, aching realization that his arrogance had cost him everything. As Donovan was escorted out of the building, the officers watched him go, some with mixed feelings but most with a sense of relief. They had seen his behavior, seen how he had treated others for so long, and while many had been too afraid to do anything about it, Maya had stepped forward and done what no one else could. The silence that followed Donovan's exit was heavy, but not uncomfortable. It was a silence filled with respect, awe, and, in some cases, guilt. The truth was out, and the man who had once ruled the precinct with his arrogance and toxic behavior was now gone. Maya turned to face her colleagues, her eyes scanning the room. She didn't need to say anything. The way they looked at her now spoke volumes. The officers who had once treated her with indifference, who had watched her struggle under the weight of Donovan's harassment, now stood with a newfound respect. She didn't expect gratitude or praise. She didn't need it. But she could see it in their eyes, the recognition of her strength, her intelligence, and the quiet power she had always possessed. It wasn't just about bringing down Donovan. It was about the fact that she had done it without ever losing her integrity, without ever resorting to the same tactics that he had used to manipulate and control others. Maya had fought her battle with patience, with strategy, and with the knowledge that justice, when it was served, would always be the most powerful weapon of all. As the officers began to file out of the room, murmurs of agreement and support spread through the air. Some patted Maya on the back, others nodded in acknowledgement. For the first time, she felt seen, not as the quiet woman in the corner, not as the one who had to endure the slights and insults of her colleagues, but as someone who had made a real difference. And that was enough for her. She knew that the journey wasn't over. There would always be more work to be done. There would always be more challenges to face, more battles to fight. But today, in this moment, Maya had won. As she walked out of the precinct, her head held high, she thought about how far she had come. From the quiet, overlooked agent to the woman who had brought down one of the most arrogant and harmful officers in the department. It was a victory not just for her, but for everyone who had ever been underestimated, overlooked, or silenced. Justice had been served. And Maya Carter had proven that sometimes, the quietest person in the room could make the loudest impact. As Maya left the precinct, she couldn't help but reflect on the journey that had led her to this moment. It hadn't been easy, and there had been times when she had doubted herself, when she had questioned whether it was worth it to keep fighting. But in the end, it had been worth it. Donovan's removal was a victory, not just for her, but for the entire department. The ripple effects of what had happened that day would echo through the precinct for a long time to come. Maya had proven that standing up for what's right wasn't always about making the loudest noise or being the most forceful person in the room. Sometimes, it was about patience. Sometimes, it was about quietly doing the work, watching, waiting, and making sure that when the time came, you were ready to take action. Maya had always known that she was capable of more than what others had seen in her. Now, everyone knew it too. And that was a victory that couldn't be taken away from her. Her phone buzzed in her pocket, interrupting her thoughts. She took it out, glancing at the screen. It was a text from her mentor, Agent Langston. "I heard what happened. Well done, Maya. You've just shown the world what happens when patience and integrity come together. Keep fighting the good fight." Maya smiled to herself, feeling a sense of gratitude toward the agent who had guided her through some of the toughest moments of her career. It had been his advice, his belief in her, that had kept her going all this time. And now, with Donovan gone, she felt like she had finally earned her place not just as an agent, but as someone who had the power to make a real difference. As she walked down the hallway of the precinct one last time, she felt a sense of peace settle over her. She had done it. And though there would always be more challenges to face, more injustices to confront, she knew she was ready. The work would continue, but for now, she had made her mark. And that, she realized, was enough. The room was quiet, but it was a different kind of silence now. It wasn't filled with tension or uncertainty, like it had been when Donovan was still at the precinct. No, this silence was full of admiration and respect. Maya Carter had earned every bit of it, and it was the kind of recognition that couldn't be faked. She hadn't been the loudest in the room, nor had she been the most outspoken. She didn't need to be. Maya had always known that her strength wasn't in making noise, it was in waiting, in watching, in being patient. She understood the power of silence. The power of knowing when to stand still and when to act. And she had acted at the right moment, with precision and purpose. Looking around at the officers who had once looked at her with doubt or indifference, Maya could see it now, the shift. They understood what had just happened. They saw the truth. Maya hadn't just taken down a corrupt officer, she had shown them all a different kind of strength. A quiet strength that didn't need to shout to be heard. And that was something most people never truly understood. In a world that often celebrated the loudest voices, the most forceful personalities, Maya had proven that sometimes, the most powerful people are the ones who are underestimated. They are the ones who don't draw attention to themselves. They don't seek validation or approval. They just do what needs to be done, with quiet determination. And when the time is right, they change the game. Maya had never been the type to let others define her. From the moment she had stepped into the FBI, she had known she had to prove herself. She had faced challenges from the start, being a woman in a field dominated by men, being a black woman in a place where people didn't always expect much from her. She had faced judgment, prejudice, and outright disrespect. But she had never let any of that stop her. She had kept her head down, focused on her work, and built herself into someone who could never be ignored. She had learned how to wait for the right moment. How to gather strength, quietly, so that when the time came, she would be ready. And when that time finally came, she had struck. But even in that moment, when she revealed the truth about Donovan, Maya had remained calm. There was no need for anger. No need for shouting. She didn't need to raise her voice to make her point. The evidence spoke for itself. The truth spoke for itself. And when Donovan's world came crashing down, it wasn't because Maya had yelled or fought back in anger. It was because she had done the work. She had gathered the pieces and waited for the right time to put them all together. It wasn't just a victory for Maya. It was a victory for anyone who had ever been underestimated, overlooked, or dismissed. Sometimes, people forget that power doesn't always come in the form of strength or loudness. Sometimes, the most powerful thing you can do is simply stand tall, quiet, and steady. Let the world underestimate you. Let them think you're weak, or quiet, or too small to make a difference. Because when you know what you're capable of, when you know your worth, you can afford to wait. And when the right moment comes, you strike. That's exactly what Maya had done. She had taken down a man who thought he was untouchable, who thought his power would protect him from the consequences of his actions. She had done it with quiet strength, with patience, and with the unshakable belief that justice would prevail. And justice had prevailed. Maya knew that there would always be more challenges to face. There would always be more people to prove wrong, more systems to dismantle, and more injustices to correct. But she also knew that she was ready for whatever came next. Because sometimes, the most powerful thing you can do is wait for your moment. And when it comes, you seize it. Maya had proven that, and she had proven it to herself most of all. Now, as she walked out of the precinct, her head held high, she didn't need anyone's approval. She didn't need anyone's praise. Because Maya Carter knew that true power wasn't in the applause of others, it was in the quiet confidence that came from knowing who you really were. She had always known her worth. Now, everyone else knew it, too. And as she took her first steps into the next chapter of her life, Maya Carter smiled. She had changed the game. And she knew, without a doubt, that no one would ever underestimate her again. Sometimes, those who are underestimated hold the most power. They are the ones who wait, who gather strength, and when the time comes, they know how to strike. They don't need to shout to be heard. They don't need to fight back immediately to win. They simply stand tall, confident in who they are, and let their actions speak for them. Those who judge others by appearances, they're the ones who never see it coming. And Maya Carter had just proven that. She hadn't needed to shout. She hadn't needed to fight. She had just needed to wait. And in that waiting, she had found the strength to change everything. The world had underestimated her. But that was the last mistake anyone would ever make.